Hey, what's up? I did a video previously about ranking 80 carry champions based on like my preference of playing them, and then someone recommended that I do a tier list for support champions I like to play, which makes a whole hell of a lot more sense. So anyways, going into season 10, this is going to be my tier list of supports, and this is in preseason right now. So if you're watching this video way later in the season, it's kind of a first impressions type of thing, but I do have a lot of bases on the champions I'm choosing. So that's that, and for the sake of making it where I don't have to involve every champion that exists in League of Legends potentially in the support role, I'm gonna exclude pretty fringe picks. So if you think like Urgot's a viable support because he works in your gold games, I mean, leave a comment. Everyone will be glad to discuss with you about it. So that's that. And if you're interested in my content, twitch.tv/SawyerNelson. So the first support I'm going to start with S plus is Morgana. Going into season 10, the enchanter supports are strong. The tanks are a bit weaker, but Morgana's always been like one of the best blind picks in solo queue because you're able to deal with basically anything that's thrown at you. There are champions that beat her, such as Johnna, most of the enchanters that like outrange her, but in a solo queue context, like you can just poke with your W and then all in with your flash Q on those champions. So it's like, yes, they counter you, but if you have the ability to outplay them, you're still going to beat those champions most of the time. So Morgana's like stayed pretty solid in her position in the meta, regardless of the changes to the support items in the season, and then also with the nerfs to tanks, because she was already able to be picked when aftershock supports were the most dominant thing in the game, and now that they're knocked down a peg, and then enchanter and mage supports are gonna rise, she's still by far the best blind pick because of her black shield, and then with the changes to support items, she's gonna have a lot more AP. So support item gives her a lot of AP early. First item Shirelia's gives you movement speed for defensive and offensive capabilities, and then third item Athene's really strong, man. Really great champion. I really recommend you pick up Morgana, and first pick her when you can. Second S tier is going to be Zyra. Um, Same reason why Morgana's strong. The new support item gives you so much AP when it's fully completed, and then you don't have to upgrade the item with your gold anymore. So whenever you're building items on Zyra, you can get Magic Pin way earlier in the game, like way earlier. So if you're winning lane, you're gonna have Sork Pin boots by like 8 to 11 minutes, and then by the time mid game comes around, you can have Oblivion Orb, you have double Magic Pin, and then anything you get after that is just icing on the cake. Leandry's nice. Zanya's nice. It's so strong. And the main thing with Zyra too is that you're playing basically a mage in the support role. You function by offering defensive capability through your damage, which is so nice. Being able to deal damage from the support role in the solo queue context is probably the most valuable thing, right? Everything else is nice, but if you're looking to play the support role like it is in competitive and solo queue, that's cool if you're like top 50 in your region. But like until then, just run damage, Just run damage. Pick Zyra, deal a lot of damage. Senna isn't in this tier making program because it's just a little outdated. But anyways, Senna would be probably S. Um, the reason being is like Senna is strong, but she also has to scale. Champions like Zyra Morgana not only like counter their melee opposition, but then also beat them, right? Senna does beat a lot of melee oppositions, but let's say champions like Leona and maybe Nautilus, like let's say Leona Zac, like they really do deal with Senna pretty well, and they negate her ability to accelerate into the mid game, meaning like she gets more gold through the support item and then more turret plates, etc. They negate her ability to do that going into the mid game, and then you basically end up in an even matchup. And Ascena doesn't feel so good, even though that you're going to be scaling. So she is fine. Definitely still S tier, which is closest to the top tier. And then it's the same thing where Senna deals damage and then also provides utility. So she provides a little bit of healing and shielding with her Q and ult, and then she has a little bit of CC in her W, and then she has the utility of her E, which has basically just a multi-purpose. But then the way Senna primarily functions is just her damage. Like, so yeah, 80 carry. AD carry. S plus S plus S, mage, AD carry, go figure. First actual support, I guess, on the list is Johnna in the S tier. Johnna early game functions as a lot of damage. She's basically like what Lulu wants to be, but Lulu's really bad, right? So she does a lot of damage early and then transitions very quickly. Like you only have to put 2 points in your W and then you can start maxing your E. So very quickly you can transition into a shielding and supportive role. Unlike other support champions, like let's say other enchanters like I said, Lulu, maybe Soraka, where if they want to deal damage early, like a significant amount for it to matter in the laning phase, then they have to give up their scaling for their utility ability. And in the support role, if you're putting more than 2 points in your offensive ability early, which in this case it's Johnna's W, then you're not going to have an ability maxed by level 9. So by the time mid game rolls around, like you might not even have an ability maxed yet, and especially like if you don't have your shield maxed on Johnna, you're losing a ton of value. So that's that. So the reason Johnna's like so top is like very easy to play, lots of damage, and then in the mid game, your ability to deny enemies, even if they're like let's say 3 kills up, especially going into season 10 junglers, the discrepancy between junglers is going to be very high. A bad jungler can be level 4 to a good jungler's level 7. It's going to be pretty brutal. So in solo queue, you have the ability to win lane early with Johnna, and then maybe even out a losing matchup coming into the mid game if you can deny them the ability to like keep building and building on their lead, right? Because you're gonna have your shields and ults to deny the enemy like actually getting kills on your allies. So it's really nice. And in solo queue, like if you haven't played a support champion like let's say hundreds of games in a season, you're probably really gonna feel it with Johnna, where it's just like it's so nice to even out a playing field like that in such a chaotic environment. So that's pretty nice. Second on S tier is going to be Bard. Bard, pretty similar to Johnna. You deal a lot of damage early, and then you can transition into being a supportive champion. But with the interesting thing with Bard is you don't have to do that. Let's say if you were winning, you could have a similar build to Zyra, where you just get Sword Pin Boots, Oblivion Orb, and then you could even get like Proto Belt on Bard if you're winning. And then if you want to take a defensive route, then you would still be maxing Q, but then you could run the Guardian Keystone. So let's say you're playing into champions like Leona, Alistair, etc. If you have Guardian Keystone for you and your ally, then you provide peel for them while still having damage, because Bard's damage is going to scale with his levels and then his chimes collected. Unlike other champions who like really need items, Bard doesn't need that to scale. But he also has the benefit of if he is winning, and let's say you're running Electrocute and you're building the magic pin items, then he just becomes even stronger and can become like his own carry. So Bard's always been like a pretty solid solo queue pick because his roam potential and then his ability to just deal damage regardless, right? And coming into this season, the change to Shurelya's really helps Bard, as your first item in lane can be like let's say Boots of Mobility and then a Crystalline Bracer into Shurelya's. That's pretty nice. And then the Frostfang upgrading into a ridiculous AP items, very nice. And then all the defensive items on him also work really well. So even if you were to build like let's say Shurelya's Locket, pretty good. Locket Redemption, pretty good. Sorkfin Oblivion Orb, very good. So you have a lot of options with Bard, which is nice. And he deals a lot of damage. Fantastic champion, runs everywhere. Great. You get to pick up meat. Great. I kind of want to put Thresh in A tier, but I think he deserves like the last place in S tier. He's one of the few CC supports that functions at range, which is interesting. I wish they would make another champion like Thresh, to be honest, versus a champion like Pike, who's just like a gimp. Not even like a gimp. He's like a hack of a champion. So with Thresh, you're still a threat in lane to all of these champions, and you function as offense against squishy champions, and then you function as defense against engaged champions. So if Alistair, Leona are trying to get onto your carries, you have Flay and Lantern for the carry. If let's say the Johnna Bard's trying to poke your carry, you have Flash Flay to engage on them. You have Hook to punish them for that. So Thresh covers basically all bases. And then the double-edged sword of that is that he doesn't excel at at anything particularly, but he does cover all bases. So it's pretty solid in that sense. And so long that you're not just walking forward and landing throwing hook and then eating a ton of damage, then you're going to be playing Thresh fine, basically. If walk up, flay hook. Okay, okay. A tier, first pick's going to be Braum. Most people don't see Braum as that good, mainly because Braum has to scale, but if the enemy doesn't really like win a laning phase very, very hard, then Braum's going to function pretty similarly to how he did around, I want to say, season 6, where if you're not smashing him in lane, then you're really going to have to deal with him mid game. And come mid game, like everything's going to be about dragon fights and then maybe even Rift Herald fights. So his ult and then his Q and then his passive is so ridiculous to try to like get through for the enemy. If they ever try to engage and if you drop the ult on them, it's very hard for them to deal with. You obviously lack a laning phase with him, but if let's say your last pick and a lot of these are banned, and then the onus isn't on you to win lane as support. If you pick something like Braum, then you can kind of flip the dynamic of the lane where it's up to the enemy to win it early, and if they don't, well, you're going to be like this level 11 Braum that the enemy can't get past, and then when they get on top of, then they're losing as well because of his passive Q and ult. So, a very good defensive champion. It's pretty underutilized in my opinion. Second A tier is going to be Leona. Pretty basic, like one of the most basic engage supports there is. It's just get level 3, E on top of the enemy. Did that stun kill them? Nice. Did it not? Well, you did some damage. Very strong solo queue pick as she has like some of the highest stats in the game. Lots of health, lots of armor, lots of magic resist. If you die on this champion, man, you really went out of your way to do so. And she has damage on top of all that. Damage that scales with her levels because of her passive rather than other support champions like let's say Nautilus, where he has to have the damage himself through ability power. So a true support in that sense, and then a true engage support. And then the double-edged sword is that if Leona can't go in, then she can't play the game. And that's why she's not like S tier or S plus tier, is like if the enemy's winning, Leona's losing. But with these champions, if the enemy's winning, then they're still scaling. So it's a fine line you play on Leona, and one I don't particularly enjoy playing in solo queue, as if if one person on your team loses, your job becomes very lame. You can't go in. And I don't like doing that because odds are you've played solo queue. Odds are someone's gonna die. Third in A tier is gonna be Zac. Zac might seem strange to some people, but Zac's a pretty genuinely good support right now. Into champions like all the enchanters, more particularly the mage supports. If they pick something like Zyra, Xerath, Senna early, and you respond with Zac, it's again the onus is on them to win the laning phase. And then if they don't, once you have 3 points in your E, it's going to extend the range very, very long. And since there's 3 lane brushes now, you're going to be able to jump from the bush closest to your tower on top of the enemy. And then come mid game, your ult and team fights is super, super high value, so long that you're on top of like meaningful targets. And then you basically have a revive passive. So they deal with you once, and then you come back to life. And if while you're dying in that passive, you're just giving your team super high value in a team fight too, because if the enemy's hitting the blobs, then they can't be hitting your allies. So Zac's a very interesting pick coming into season 10, and I'll be interested to see like how he evolves in the support meta. Obviously countered by champions like Johnna, Thresh, but so long that it's not picked into obvious counters, then it's going to be pretty interesting. Third in A tier is going to be Alistair. Pretty similar function to Zac, but he does offer some more utility, as Alistair goes in, gets his combo off, stuns someone, and then survives in a fight. So he's going to be surviving, hopefully long enough to get another headbutt pulverize off. And then throughout a laning phase, you have like an immediate engage threat versus not, right? Because Zac has to either wind up his E in front of the enemy or cast it from a bush, or use his Q, which is even harder in the bot lane to like actually land. Versus Alistair, if you're like close to the enemy, then they have to respect your headbutt pulverize combo. And then if the enemy's moving onto your AD, then you have the option to flash pulverize them and then headbutt them either away or towards your AD and then separate the AD and support in that sense. That and then Alistair's damage is just higher than Zack's early until like Zack gets ult. So I think Alistar's still a pretty good pick. And then he also has like a bit of sustain to deal with mage and enchanter supports, because if the enchanter and mage supports are pushing into Alistar, you're gonna give Alistar a free lane, so then he gets to level 6 faster, and then the matchup kind of flips where once these champions move forward, then Alistar has the option to engage on them. And then once his aftershock is over, he can use his ult and then just block so much damage from them. So yeah. Fourth on A tier is going to be Poppy. People might view Poppy kind of like Zack, where you might have not seen it a lot, but I don't think most players, unless you're like, let's say D1 plus, should even mess with Poppy, as she's more of a denial champion. She denies enemies' dashes, and if you can't use her W correctly, you lose a lot of value. But Poppy has a lot of damage. She gets to benefit from the AD support item, and then you have the ability to separate enemies with her ult. So she's a pretty genuinely good support, but since she's not a traditional support, any non-traditional support such as Poppy, Zack, let's say Nautilus too, if they fall behind, you're going to be falling behind by a lot more, as these champions don't have like inherent scaling in their kits. So you have to be playing these champions way better than you would have to be traditional support champions. Okay. Where am I at? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in the A tier is going to be Xerath. Pretty similar to Zyra, where you're going to be having defensive utility through your damage. And with Xerath in lane, you have humongous range. So even if the enemy was to pick something like Senna, who would be here in S+, you still have the ability to outrange champions like that with a counter pick in Xerath. And then if they get too close, you stun them, and then you dump every ability on them. And the like range champions like Senna just don't have the health or like magic resist to deal with that. And then your itemization is so good for mage supports this season. Prior, you would have to get Frostfang, Sorkpin Boots, Oblivion Orb, and then that would be your whole build. Now you can get the upgraded support item, which gives you like 45 AP, 150 health, and then you could even sit on free boots for a while and then just build a Ludens on Xerath. If you're winning lane, sure, get Sorkpin boots early. But if you're not, you could just save up for Ludens, have this lost chapter in lane, always be able to spam spells, and then once you complete Ludens, you complete Sorkpin boots, and then you build into almost anything. Liandry's, Void Staff, Oblivion Orb, etc. So like the mage support's itemization has never been better, and it's so free. It's so like gross how free it is. So Xerath, great support into champions like basically the offensive champions. All these S tiers, Morgana, Zyra, Senna, even not really Bard, but Morgana, Zyra, Senna, great champion into all of those. And if the enemy was just for some reason pick something like Braum first pick, better. I mean Zyra, any of those great options. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Seventh in A tier is going to be Tarek. He's kind of situational. I kind of want to put him in B tier because I don't really know like his true strength, because a champion like this is so useless early, usually, that you don't really see it too often to really get a feel for how he would function like mid game. But the thing with Tarek is, coming into season 10, is that junglers are going to be a bit weaker because of XP, and then mid laners are going to be a lot stronger, and then top laners are going to be a lot stronger. So the thing is with Xerath, if the enemy mid and top have picked champions that have to dive on top of your team, or the thing with Tarek, if the enemy picks those champions, then his ult is so absolutely destructive to those champions, because the enemy champions diving on your team can't deal damage. You would have to terribly time the ult for it to just not have huge value. And then you couple that with the rest of his basic abilities, he can be a very solid pick. And especially if you're playing it into something like Alistair, Braum, any melees basically, so long that you're not picking it into something super brutal like any of the mage supports, then it's going to be fine. And then come mid game, you're going to be able to really deny champions like that. Whatever in A tier is going to be Soraka. Soraka has the same benefit of all the other enchanters, is that this AP support item's broken. You're going to have the new Shirelias as an option, and that is so cool for Soraka because her biggest weakness is that once she's in a position, she can't get out of it. So if the enemy dives onto her, she's not getting away. Even though she has her silence and her Q, it's not enough. But with Shirelias, if let's say an enemy dives on top of you and then you use the silence and Q, and then you use the Shirelias active, you can actually get away and then actually be at a safe distance to function in a fight. So that's nice. That and Soraka can also be a counter pick to a champion like Senna, where a champion like Senna, Zyra, or like any of the poke champions where their poke is entirely negated by Soraka's heals. And then if they get hit by one Soraka Q, so long that you're playing backline, then you're gonna you just heal too much. The enemy's gonna run out of mana, and then if they overstay in the lane, they're doomed. So you have a very safe laning phase, and then you also have a global ult, which is wildly useful in solo queue. And then so long. The thing is with Soraka too, like if you play her a lot, like she's gonna teach you proper positioning on enchanter supports, especially come mid game, because she's gonna teach you obviously don't walk in the enemy jungle and then ward nothing just to die to the enemy jungler, right? She's gonna teach you like position behind carries and fights so that you're actually in position to heal them and peel for them properly, and so that you don't die yourself. So Soraka's a great champion to learn the game on, in my opinion. Third in A tier is gonna be Yumi. I'm not exactly sure Yumi's power particularly. I think things like running Glacial Augment is interesting on her, as you get Twin Shadows basically very quickly in the game, and then you could later get GLP. So I think having like this Glacial control mage that just can't be touched inside an 80 carry is very interesting, but I don't think Yumi functions as she used to with the Arcane Comment and whatnot. So but the thing is with Yumi too is that she deals a lot of damage and then also provides either a lot of AP or a lot of peel for her team. So I'd put her A tier mainly because like enchanter items would carry her even if she's bad, and then yeah, the utility is pretty good. And then next in A tier is going to be Swain. Swain was kind of becoming meta in the later parts of season 10 with champions like Draven specifically. You would even see it maybe with like long range champions like Caitlyn. And the reason being is that if the Aftershock supports couldn't land a hook on Swain, which if with Swain you could have your Q and W to control the wave, and then you have your E to catch the enemy. And then if you're playing in a Draven lane, the Aftershock supports would be losing anyways. So that's kind of how Swain functioned prior. Come season 10, I think it's the same thing. If you're not picking Swain with Draven, it still seems really weird to me. He's an interesting counter pick for sure, but if you're not picking him with Draven, it's really weird. His itemization is obviously better, as again the AP support item is just better. You could even get the AD or the AP and health item. Yeah, it's just called the old Relic Shield. You could just get the Relic Shield and then Roa first on him. It sounds so weird for support, but it's like that's just how it functions. So again, A tier because deals damage and can tank some. Next in A tier is going to be Shaco. With the rework to Shaco, it made it so that a lot of his damage or his AP damage is a lot higher and his boxes function a lot better. And whenever his ult breaks or dies, I guess, it drops boxes that immediately proc. So he becomes like a CC nuisance and basically functions as like anti-dive. And then coming into season 10, he could just run Relic Shield instead of Frostfang and still be getting AP. So he actually has a genuine way to like farm the support item, which is nice. And he also, yeah, so he just functions as like anti-dive by placing boxes on his allies and then spamming his E if the enemy's too close. And then come mid game around team fights, his ult becomes super annoying for the enemy to deal with. And the lower elo you are, the more likely they are to hit that clone, and then it just explodes on them, deals tons of damage, instantly procs the boxes. It's the enemy CC'd and taking damage from the boxes. And then you could even be on top of them at that point. Stealth, drop another box, your team engages. Very interesting support. but pretty off meta. So if you're new to the support role, try to stick to something like Zyra, Alistair. But yeah, Shaco's a very interesting support. Man, I almost want to put here. I'll just put Nautilus at B tier. Like Nautilus was like the top tier support in season 9, but come season 10, like he has to scale in lane. He does have a scaling advantage, which is interesting because if the enemy doesn't punish him in the early game and he's able to get it into the mid game, like level 9 and then level like 12, he's gonna get stronger than the enemy support as the relic shield's gonna give him AP now. And then in general, like if Nautilus gets through a laning phase, like he's just gonna get stronger because of like his base stats scaling and then his ability to itemize nowadays. So that's why I'd put him at B tier because like let's say his engage in lane versus Leona is so much worse, and then but his scaling's better. But then unless the game's going even, it doesn't even matter. So in the support role, that's super brutal. I really love Nautilus, but he's really knocked down a peg this season. Unfortunate. Next in B tier is going to be Blitzcrank. I think Blitzcrank's kind of at. You could maybe even make an argument for Blitzcrank A tier, but like with Blitzcrank in solo queue, like so you land the hook, you knock up, and then you ult, and then your entire kit's on cooldown. His passive doesn't do anything. His W doesn't do anything. Really weird champion in my opinion. His benefit is that like he's a very noob stompy champion, so he has that going for him. But you really don't need that in League of Legends solo queue. Like players in solo queue, you don't need a champion that beats them harder if they're bad, because like another champion, like another tank champion, gains more benefit if the enemy's bad by scaling better, right? Not by getting more kills on them. So Blitzcrank's okay, but not the best. And then next in B tier is going to be Pike. Pike's in a pretty similar boat as Nautilus, as he has to scale now, which seems so weird as like all Pike wanted to do in season 9 was just leave lane as soon as possible, which you could still do that. You could still run Predator on Pike and then leave lane like first recall because you could buy boots and it wouldn't have any detrimental effects versus last season where you had to upgrade Relic Shield into Targons for this to gain value. But with Pike nowadays, like he wants to just sit in lane, get as many levels as possible so that he can get to level 11 as fast as possible to have the 2 points in his ult so that he can actually like start participating in the game, because until then all these supports above him are going to just get so much more value. So yeah, I don't really feel that bad about it either because Pike had his time, and what a scourge of a champion this was. Dude, running top lane, getting a kill, running mid lane, getting a kill. Whatever, Pike. Recon at B tier. Recon's in a weird spot because he's an enchanter support to the fullest now. Last season he functioned primarily as engage, but the only way he functions now is by like standing behind his allies and then using the shield and then knocking up the enemy, queuing, and then using the shield again, right? Like he only functions like through peeling for his allies versus being offensive, which is healthy for Recon, but puts him in a pretty weird spot as the other enchanter supports just do his job better until way later in the game. So in a similar boat to Nautilus, like he has to scale. And until he gets to like, let's say level 13, then he's going to be feeling a lot worse than other enchanters or other engaged supports because he's a mix of the two. So that's why I put him at B tier. Next in B tier is going to be Volibear. I'm pretty sure they're going to rework Volibear this season. I think I read that somewhere. So I don't think Volibear is bad. The thing is, like, if you're going to practice a champion before the rework, it feels really weird. It feels super weird. So I just don't recommend anyone play the champion, even though Volibear still functions fine, right? You get level 3, you flash flip a mage or enchanter support, you win the game in solo queue. But if he's going to be reworked, it feels really bad to practice him. So honestly, let's put Fiddlesticks A tier. He has a way to push the wave. The support item's good on him. His snowballing potential is pretty high. And then he has a Fog of War play too, pretty similar to Zac, where he's going to come out of nowhere basically because of his ult. That has impossibly high value in solo queue because, you know, 5 people mid lane, you press R. It's pretty high value, dude. In the laning phase, your entire job is just spam E on the wave until the enemy like missteps and you flash fear them, and that's that. Pretty basic legacy support champion. So if you haven't picked up Fiddlesticks, or if you're looking to maybe expand your champion pool or something, probably pick him up. Pretty good support champion. BTR, I'm gonna put Brand. Brand's a like, for some reason people have like a pretty good affiliation for Brand support, and I never really felt it. He was pretty strong around like, what even was it, season 5 or something, when A and X was playing at Worlds. Like, he was okay then, and he's been downhill since. This season does help him, but then he's outclassed by Zyra and Xerath. So I really wish people would just drop Brand. Like, he's just bad compared to these other mage supports, and has been for a while. So his only advantage is his W range in lane, but that's kind of negated by the lane brushes in bot lane now. So fuck this champion, pretty bad. Wish everyone would drop him. Okie doke, and then I'll put Ziggs C tier. Well, if Brand's up here, honestly, let's just put Ziggs B tier, because any champion below A, right, you shouldn't even consider. Like, these should just be your main picks. Remember, Senna's right here, right? Like, these should be your main picks in solo queue. Don't even entertain these, because they're just lower value, right? So Ziggs in B tier, I think Ziggs can function as support, but the thing is, like, his peel sucks, and if he's not winning lane, he's not going to win the game, and that feels really, really bad. He has the advantage of his Q basically never being on a cooldown, but it's hard to land the Q, and if you're into tank matchups, landing the Q doesn't even matter, really. So yeah, interesting like new support, I guess. Veigar, pretty similar boat. Veigar is like broken in the mid lane role or in the AD role, so it's like if you're putting this in the support role, it's kind of gimped. He can function for sure, but I would prefer to see it in the carry roles, as he just accelerates a lot faster. Nami is an enchanter that is basically just a luxury, right? Nami, her abilities only exist to like deal more damage, basically. She has her Q and ult to peel, but then her E and W are basically just damage. The W heals. You're right. The W heals, but like, it's basically just for damage, versus champions like Johnna, where the shield and heal is like actually doing something. Because you're gonna get 2 shields off in a fight, and then an ult that can heal your entire team, right? Nami can get 1 W on 1 ally during a fight. If she gets 2, it's like a pretty lucky extended fight. So yeah, Nami's just a luxury, basically. So I mean, if hyper carries were to come into the meta, maybe a champion like Nami would be super, super good. But Nami also has anti-synergies with champions that would be picked, like Xayah, you know? Like, her heal and her ult and her Q to peel. What do they even do when Xayah can just ult to dodge anything? It feels bad, and that's what it feels like. Alrighty. Next champion is Lux. Lux was like, again, another top tier pick in season 9 because of Aftershock. But she's fallen off, as she still has damage and then still has like okay shielding. But again, it's like all luxury, as it's just all damage, and then it's not as much damage as the mage supports. So why even bother? Like, a similar theme you can see with all these B tier picks is like they have to scale, and if they don't scale, then they lose. And it's not scale in the sense of like play safe and get there. It's like, if you're considering chaos and solo queue, like, you're just not going to get to the points in which they're relevant. You're not going to get to like level 13 as support with the game being completely even in solo queue. So why even bother? B tier Sona, exact same boat as Lux. She might be like a step ahead of Lux because of her ult, but yeah, but Sona's just a bad version of like Zyra and Johnna. Zilean's kind of interesting, as he can still function. You could even make an argument for like Zilean being A tier, but any CC that catches out Zilean, he dies. If you don't have a lot of AP like coming into mid game, Zilean can also be pretty useless. Zilean's cool though, in the sense of like his bombs can create zones in team fights, but if you're not in position first, you lose a ton of value. If his E movement speed doesn't do anything for his carries, you lose a ton of value, and then if the revive isn't useful, then you lose a ton of value, because even if you can bring an ally back to life, it doesn't mean that they're gonna just not die immediately after coming back to life. So kind of a very like hard champion to use. Not in the sense of like it's hard to cast his abilities. It's like if the champions around him or against him aren't in his favor, then he ceases to like have the same value that most of these champions retain, regardless of the champions around them. Lulu, I'm gonna put in C tier. Again, like she's like a bad version of Johnna, where her shielding doesn't scale fast enough. Her ult like only works on one ally, and then her other two abilities are just luxuries. Like having more attack speed is nice, or like having the W on an enemy is nice, and then the Q slow is nice, but it doesn't have like a higher function. And then if Lulu gets behind, then the game's over. Karma, same thing. It's just like this champion barely wins lane, and then the reward for doing so is like not being useful mid game because the champion can't do anything in the support role mid game. So might as well play like both of these in the mid lane to get value out of them. Gallio. Gallio's an interesting pick, as if you pick this like into melees, it makes it very hard for them to engage because you could always buffer W. But if Gallio doesn't have an ally to ult to like Jarvan or Camille, he again just loses tons of value. So not so useful. Chogath deals a lot of damage, but dies instantly to almost everything in the support role. And then if you miss your Q, you're useless. And then if you don't get in range to silence, you're useless. He's interesting though. He's interesting. You do get AP from the Relic Shield now, but you have to scale a lot on Chogath before you're useful. Shin was good because he could eat a hook and then taunt away, or he could flash taunt and then have global presence with his ult. Nowadays, you're just going to be pushed in permanently by either the range supports or the melees are going to like function as like better engage and then better peel than what Shin can offer. Ornn, a better top laner than he is support. He just gets beat up by like every range support and then every melee. If they engage onto Ornn, they're winning, and if Ornn spends his abilities incorrectly, then they have a free engage onto Ornn's AD. So Ornn could be picked support. That's like that's why he's in the tier list, but his damage like isn't enough. It doesn't scale fast enough. His peel like is almost non-existent, and then his ult is nice, but his ult functions exactly the same in the top lane when the rest of his abilities can also function because he'll have items from being played in a carry role. Malphite. Malphite has his Q poke early, but if he can't get it off, he's useless. If you miss your ults, it's useless. More so if the enemy flashes his ult, it's useless. And then his other two abilities basically don't do anything in the laning phase. So yeah, Malphite like into range champion sounds really stupid. Your E's not gonna hit them. And if it does, like you already landed an ult on them, so kinda useless. Maokai, you could even make an argument for Maokai being B tier, but Maokai's in a pretty similar boat to Nautilus where he has to scale because he's a non-traditional support, so he needs like health items, he needs armor items, and if he ceases to get those at all stages, then he starts losing. And the thing is with these scaling supports too, like previously there wasn't a cap on the gold generation on support items, so you would continue to make gold throughout all stages of the game. But once you make 1,000 gold on the new support item, you cease to make gold. You can't hit relic stacks anymore. Damaging champions won't make you gold anymore. And then even if you get a chance to take CS, if you take too much CS, it starts giving you less value. So even if you get into a position to like actually start earning gold again, that's not through kills and assists, it's going to be lower value. So it really it's just like a huge detriment to champions that are non-traditional supports in this sense. And I'm glad that they balance the support items like that so that it would make sense like what champions are picked where, but it's just to the detriment to all the non-traditional supports. Next in C tier is going to be Tahm Kench. I don't even know what Tahm Kench's function is really supposed to be nowadays. Like his poke is bad, he gets beat by every single range support. And then he eats his ally to save them for like half a second, and then Tahm Kench dies. So pretty bad. Next in C tier is going to be Talia. I honestly don't know where to place Talia. Her range in lane is nice, but the problem with Talia is that her base armor is so low, and all the enchanter supports would probably outrange her. So if it just feels bad to play her in the bot lane, but if you were to play her into like a non-traditional bot lane matchup, maybe she would gain some value. And you would also have an interesting like roam advantage because of her passive and because of her ult. So an interesting pick, but one that's just really hard to pull off because again her base armor is so low. And then the last two is going to be allowing Mordekaiser for counter pick / situational. Alawi can be picked into melee supports and then functions as like an anti-dive because of her ult and because of her E. And with the new AD support items plus Black Cleaver, like it puts Alawi in a really interesting spot where if the enemy like dives, then they're going to be taking so much more damage than they would otherwise. So really weird and interesting champion. If you haven't touched Alawi and you only play support, don't touch this champion. It's not worth your time, but she does function. And then with Mordekaiser, I'm really not sure with Mordekaiser, but his ult, being able to take someone out of a team fight, super interesting. Relic Shield giving AP, and then Mordekaiser being able to actually complete Rylai's early in the game in the support role is really interesting. But again, like if you cease to like be winning the game, then the other tank supports will just outscale you. But your ability to just take a carry out of the fight, especially a champion like let's say Kinnan, like let's say Kinnan TP flanks, flashes on your team, and you just ult him, it's crazy. So that's the tier list. Again, here's the most important part. Remember, Senna's right here. If you have any questions, if this video was too fucking long, let me know. But yeah, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I'll be sure to like actually respond to them. And if you actually like this video, obviously liking and subscribing helps. And yeah, I'll probably be live as the season starts in season 10 on twitch.tv/SorryNelson. Thanks for watching. Maybe I'll make a shorter version of this fucking video. Alrighty, bye bye. See ya.